Welcome, Corey Poirier, to Ordinary Visionaries.
Thank you so much, Robert. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. So, Corey, tell us how are an ordinary visionary.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is an interesting question because I I struggled with this for a long time because I always kind of beat myself up because I felt I'm not kind of an operations person or a person that kind of does all the stuff to make everything look beautiful in the systems. But I've accepted that the vision side is my thing. And so I feel like how I'm an ordinary visionary is that I'm constantly like we have a thing called Blue Talks where we started it 5 years ago. It's like TEDx meets Chicken Soup for the Soul. And
Oh,
I looked at what wasn't working and decided that we needed something that offered what didn't exist. So, meaning like people wanted to speak, let's say, on a TED stage or similar and wanted to speak about spirituality, but that's not really an option. So, that's how Blue Talks came about. But I recognize that I'm one of those people that I'm like, you know what, we should try this. And then there's not a big leg between we should try this and, oh, we're doing this now. And so I think that's kind of what makes it that I'm a visionary is because I come up with an idea and I'm like, we can make this come to life. Then I see the vision and then I just kind of dive head first.
yeah, well, that's prototypical ordinary visionary. It sounds like me, you know. I've come up with so many ideas of things that I didn't know how to do. Um, this is your interview, but I can't help by saying, somebody introduced me to website design in 1995. And I said, oh man, I need a website. How do I do this? And he said, my friend said, read this book. I read this book, and a week later I had a website. A week after that, I was designing websites for people. So, that kind of thing, right? You just
That
take action, you put together a plan, you make stuff happen. So one of the reasons you're on this interview is you recently wrote a book called The Enlighten Passenger. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your background and what you've done and some of the things you've accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, so a bit about my background. Yeah, I mean, I'm a, I was raised by a single mother, grew up in a small town, didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Um,
Well,
I got a 49 plus one in my one of my classes where I needed a 50 to graduate. And so it wasn't written on my yearbook likely to succeed, let alone super likely to succeed.
likely to
And,
fail, right?
yeah, literally likely to fail. And
Yeah.
basically that would have been foreshadowing because I got the 49 plus one. So if I wrote in the yearbook halfway through the year likely to fail, I actually did. So I always say I legally graduated, but I don't think graduate theoretically. And so I grew up, like I say, in this small town. One of the other things is I didn't know the difference between, like I say, fiction and nonfiction. And I discovered that's something you don't say on a first or a second date with somebody because I had a girl kind of not invite me back on a second date when I shared that. But then to compound all that, I didn't read my first book until age 27. So all the stuffs I
Your
started
first,
doing,
what about school? Didn't you read books in school?
it's funny because I always say I technically tried to read three books in school: Lord of the Flies, Death of a Salesman, and To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I know in the U.S. and Canada they're called different things, like Cole's Notes and Cliff Notes. Anyway, that's how I get through those. So I'd read like a chapter and go, "Oh, I can't do this," and then in one of the three cases, I think I watched the movie. So of course, then when you write the test, you get it all wrong because the movie's not the same. And but basically, once you fail, you're like, all right, we're on to the next thing. Meaning, like you fail, they don't make you rewrite the test. So I think I failed the Lord of the Flies because I watched the movie. But yeah, those are the only three books I tried to read, and then I tried to read Cujo by Stephen King. And I always say it wasn't that the book scared me; it's just that the book didn't pull me in. And so that was it. I tapped out. That was, I think, 18 when I tried to read Cujo, and then I tapped out and never looked at a book or never held a book again for like 9 years.
Wow. So what happened that you finally got into reading books?
So
A lot must have happened in those 9 years.
yeah. Ultimately, what happened for me is that well, I'll say it this way: a lot happened, but not in the context of me getting to start reading. So, what actually happened that made me start reading was my mother bought, and this is such a weird scenario how things play out. She bought a book for me for 25 cents at a flea market. She didn't know why she felt compelled to write the book. I was going on a company retreat. She tucked it in my bag, and I went on the retreat. I didn't even know the book was there. I'll tell you in a second what the book was. But I got in this retreat, and I was put in this separate cottage with 3 other coworkers who were really negative. And I wasn't super negative then, so it was like, I don't want to just sit here and talk crap all day. Like, they were mad about where they worked and mad about this and that. And there was 3 other cabins. Everybody else was together except for us. And they put me with all the junior people. I was in sales. So, so I just wasn't in the same headspace. So I thought, I got to come up with an excuse, because they were going to take a kayak or 2 canoes down the river or something. And I was like, I don't want to be on the river with these guys. So I just had to figure something out. And as I was getting dressed, I was like, oh, what's this book? Wow, I don't know, but it'll be a good excuse. So I'm like, I got to read this book. I want to start reading these days. And I cracked open this book. On the front cover, it had a picture of a man, and it said, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, my God.
By Dale
Oh,
Carnegie.
my God.
And God bless Dale Carnegie, because I started reading that book and I never let go. Like, I literally never read a book in my life, started that book and read it twice the same weekend. So I've often said it's the first and second book I've ever read. And honestly, that just kicked something into me, and I started reading like I was all in. And I read Think and Grow Rich second. And as you probably know, Robert, if you're going to start late, that's a good start. So I started with those 2 books, and then I started reading a book a month, then 2 books a month, and then maxed out around 3 a month. But yeah, it was just fascinating to me that I went from somebody who didn't even understand the power of reading to this masterful storyteller pulling me in. And he pulled me in. I still know this day, the first story was about this guy named Two Gun Crowley, and how he was fighting with the law, killed police officers and everything else. But from his own perspective, he thought he was doing good in the world and didn't understand why everybody was after him. And then he kind of referenced Al Capone in the same way. Like, how people, even if they're doing bad, they think from their perspective, I'm just trying to help the world. Like, Al Capone's like, I'm just trying to help people out. I'm, giving money to the poor and stuff. And it was the story about how they don't realize it's wrong, even if we think it's wrong. And I don't know what it was about that, but that story pulled me in. And then the second story, and the book's so layered with stories, I just was like, I want the next story. And everything changed. So that's what happened in between is I probably built up to the point where I needed to read a book. And my mother somehow intuitively knew I needed to read a book and snuck that book in. And she goes, I don't know why I bought it. I don't know why I thought you'd want to read it, but here you are.
Isn't it amazing how things happen in our lives and they seem to be just at the right time? And that was obviously the right time for you. Absolutely. I remember reading that book a long time ago. I still have it in my bookshelf here. I should read it again. It's a great book. It really is inspiring. And so then what happened? So obviously that ignited you, and you saw new possibilities for success and contribution in relationships and God knows what else. So what kind of things started to happen in your life because of that?
Honestly, my life transformed. I would love to make it sound less sexy, like it was just, small stuff, but my life literally transformed. Like, I started going to seminars, something I never thought of before. I started going to events. I started following different thought leaders and watching YouTube videos of speakers, and so everything that my whole life kind of got shaken up by this one little moment of reading this book. Because what it did in terms of reading the book is I started applying the stuff I was learning and how to win friends and influence people. And I was in sales at the time. I was selling photocopiers door to door, which I don't recommend for anybody. But believe it or not, it's not for the faint at heart. That's for sure. Selling, I always say, I was trying to convince somebody they need to get rid of that yellow photocopier in the corner that they never look at and replace it with a white photocopier that's going to cost them more money, and actually being successful at it. But I was still not achieving what I wanted to. And then I read that book and I started applying what I learned. And I was like, this changes everything. And as an example from the book, I can't remember the wording, but Carnegie says something like, you can make more friends in 4 minutes by trying to learn about them than you can in 4 months trying to get them to learn about you. And I realized when I was selling, I was making it all about me. I needed to make the sale, and I can offer you this or that. And instead I started saying, well, tell me if you had a crystal ball in your hand, what would you wish for? And it changed everything. And so reading the book changed the way I sold. And then I got tricked one day this is a jump, but I got tricked into performing stand-up comedy. And that turned into a passion for me. But what happened was I went to one of the comics invited me to go see the speaker named Anthony Robbins. And I went there and they said, can you believe he gets paid this much to do this? And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. People get paid to do this? And we're going to the comedy club and spending $10 to get there and getting $5 from the door? What? I want what he has. And so that turned me on to the world of speaking. And then I started going to seminars and buying the audio tapes back then and the CDs and reading Success Magazine and getting their CDs. So quite honestly, Robert, that book changed my life. And I can honestly say that book has been worth millions of dollars to me over the years. And I say that these days, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Because my mom spent a quarter on that book, but the value of that book I probably can't measure, for my life at least.
Wow, amazing. So tell me a bit about your career trajectory after that. You're not selling copiers anymore.
No, not. I'll say not even close, really. So what changed in terms of my career is that I continued selling photocopiers for a while, like probably another 3-4 years. But it wasn't long after, like maybe months, that I started pursuing speaking. So when I read that book, I changed that way. I started pursuing a speaking career, and I was still working selling photocopiers. So my side hustle was speaking. So I'd start using my vacation days, my holidays, started using all these days to take on bookings, like after dinner talks and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so that's kind of what changed, is that I felt like for me, I wanted to start teaching the way these people were teaching. So my first ever introduction to sales training or a trainer was a guy named Zig Ziglar. And I started I worked at Toshiba, one of the companies, Toshiba, the company that has the laptops and TVs. And my training when I started was, here's a Ziglar VHS tape. Good luck. That was my training. Never forgot almost everything Ziglar said in that video tape. So it was monumental. But I always said, if I ever can help other people, I want to help them avoid what I started with, meaning no real training. And a lot of companies won't invest in training of their sales staff. So what I did, how I started, is I actually started doing sales training for like $80 to $100. And who I was targeting is the salespeople of companies that wouldn't pay for their training, who are willing to invest $100 in themselves in hopes of increasing their sales, their income, what have you. Right. And that's how I get started. I ran public seminars. We used to bring 80 to 100 people there, maybe 90 to 110. And that's kind of how I get started doing public seminars. And eventually that led to me understanding the speaking business was a bit different than I was operating. And I launched a speaking career. But that's kind of how I get started. But it all really started with that book.
Wow. And since then, you've written other books, right?
I have. Well, in fact, it's kind of interesting because my mother, when I told her I wanted to write a book, she said, I think you have to read one first. And she's probably not wrong. So and maybe that's what gave me the kick whenever the book was in my kit bag. But I wrote my first, I'm going to say, chapter in a book at age 28. So if that sounds familiar, I read the first book at 27. Less than a year later, I wrote a chapter in a book. And that's really what got me started. Because once I wrote a chapter in a book, I recognized that this isn't as hard as I was making it. Like, I've been writing articles and thinking, but a book is monumental. And then I wrote a chapter in this compilation or anthology book with all these other authors. And all of a sudden I was holding a book in my hand. I'm like, wait, that's what I've been fearful of? That's what I've been holding off on? And so honestly, that changed everything. Because then I recognized that the only thing that was holding me back was my own fear of something that really I think what happened is once I knew how the book business worked a little bit, I had less fear. And then I went, I want to go all in. And so what I did then is I started writing these books that were called Conversations With. And essentially they were a different type of book. What I would do is I would interview people for this newspaper I had. And then so after I'd done a lot of like 7 years of monthly issues, so whatever that is, 7 times 12, like 80 issues of this publication with 80 to 100 pages per publication, I'm like, I have enough interviews in here that I could just literally write a book featuring these interviews and thought leaders. And that's what happened. And then I would add a few in that were new or fresh or bigger names. But ultimately, I basically reprinted the stuff I had done in the newspaper. We did a better editing job and released these books called Conversations With. And ultimately, to present day, we released 5 of them. So we released 5 way back then. Like, they were all done in this series of a 2-year period. But basically, we released 5 books that each had about 100 to 125 profiles of thought leaders.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
it was an
you
adventure.
really tapped into the brain power of all these people. So, you do that over a period of time. After a while, you start to own that material, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is something that's kind of fascinating too. Is we run an experts boot camp. It's called once or twice a year. It's like a 3-day live virtual event. We bring on big guests. We talk about writing, speaking, podcasting, being interviewed by the media, securing endorsements, all that kind of stuff. And one of the guys that was on this time is a guy named Kelly Cardenas. And Kelly was saying, which I had never thought of. I don't know why I put this in my head, and it's kind of like almost like one of those, how have I not thought about this before now? But Kelly was saying what he does, which I think is brilliant, is if we're doing an interview like we are right now, Kelly records just his side of the interview, even when he's being interviewed. And then what he does is he gets his team to grab comments from that. So it's like his side of it. Then they'll put the words underneath. And so it's just like as if he was being interviewed for the Tonight Show, but they put it on his Instagram and they repurpose that stuff that he's already doing the interview. It's going to be promoted through the podcaster, but he's actually filming it and releasing his side of it as well. But
Wow.
what it made me think of was just on these boot camps alone, because I'm on the lion's share of the time. So if the boot camp's 30 hours, I'm on screen at least 20. And then I start thinking, we've done 7 or 8 of these. So that means I have, just from the boot camps, and this is just once or twice a year, I have over 100 hours of me on a screen that I could be repurposing now.
Right.
And that's not including those interviews. Like I've done 7,500 interviews total.
No kidding.
Yeah, and people often wonder, how's that possible? But that newspaper I told you about, I used to do 80 to 100 interviews a month, every month for 7 years. So I was already at like 3,000 or 3,500 before I ever started podcasting.
How long were these interviews?
Those ones were an hour almost each. So
Wow.
I was in a small town and I would go around and just interview people. It wasn't always like this, but there were days I was doing 8 interviews, 9 interviews in a day. Like it was insane. And we're in a town where everything is like 5 minutes from each other. So it would be like me planning my day so I could just kind of go like almost like door to door. It was really weird. It's not normal. But it would be like almost having, if you had a small town newspaper and you were a reporter for it, it was like that. But I was running the paper and we need to fill that much content, and nobody wanted to write their own article. Nobody had maybe even the knowledge of how to send in a press release.
Sure.
I had to go so now I will say I didn't write all these articles. I did the interviews kind of like a reporter, and then I had a freelancer who would write the articles. So I just want to clarify,
they transcribe it and clean it up and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want to clarify I wasn't doing that much and also writing that much.
Yeah, well, smart strategy.
Still a lot though.
So let's get into this new book. Somebody introduced me to you, and so I reached out to you. You sent me a PDF copy of the book. The book itself, The Enlighten Passenger, is to be published when?
It literally just started. I'll call it just hit pub date or publication date, June 25th. So literally 3 days ago.
Okay. So people can get it on Amazon now?
Yeah, people can buy it. Actually, today's Tuesday, so 3 days ago, I guess. Anyway, yeah, people can buy it on Amazon right now. They can buy it actually on Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart.
Okay, great.
Books A Million. Insert your name here.
Okay.
But yeah, it's available for the world to see now.
Okay, so let's talk about how this book came about. So essentially, you've distilled what I'm sure you think are some of the most important life lessons there are. And the scenario is this very successful guy gets on a plane, he's sitting in first class, has a bit of a nap, wakes up, and there's a guy sitting next to him, a bald guy with a white suit, who's just very open and whatever. He has an Om tattoo on his arm, which sort of got his attention, and he starts to talking to him. Now the hero is Robert Stapleton?
Yes.
And funny, the guy that sits next to him is Robert in reverse, Trebor.
Yeah.
I always like that the reverse of my name, Robert Middleton, is Trebor Nottledam. So that's sort of my alter ego. So I get that in a sense, that was your alter ego sitting next to him. And he starts talking to him, and even though this guy is successful, he starts to share words of wisdom that our hero Robert is not really completely acquainted with. So my first question about the book is why those 10 things? I don't know. Did you write 100 and distill it down to 10? Did it come off the top of your head? Why were those the most important things?
So it's funny when you say the most important, because quite truthfully, what I did with the book, I said to myself, these 10 things have to be the things I would tell my children if I was basically locked in a room for 24 hours with them and had
Yeah,
to share basically some nuggets of wisdom. So the question is, why those 10 things, as you mentioned? Well, out of all the interviews I did, so I mentioned thousands of interviews, I basically had to look at what are the things that really transform my life or my way of thinking the most.
yeah,
And so to answer your question, it wasn't 100 distilled down, but it was probably 21, 22. So there
yeah.
were other ones in the running. One that's completely left out, which almost broke my heart to leave out,
Right.
was around finding passions in your life. Like full talk on how to find passion. Um, I have an exercise I help people with. So we removed some aspects of that. And another thing was the what not ikigai. I think we removed most of the ikigai stuff out, which ikigai in Japan is basically the art of always moving and doing something with purpose
Right,
in a
right, right.
nutshell. And so leaving those things out was really, really tough for me. I think we left out parts about man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl, that I wanted to put in. And so if you notice a common theme, all those are around passion. And originally the book had a lot of stuff about passion. But my previous solo book was called The Book of Why and How. And it really covered, it's a nonfiction book, but it really covered how to find your passion, what to do with it. And so I just felt like if I'm going to focus on the 10 things, and let's pretend I was giving this to my kids, well, I can already give them the whole book on passion.
Yeah,
So basically, and it didn't also, the other side is, if when you're looking at the book objectively, my editor and I were looking at it, it also didn't fit. Like it felt like it was being forced in. So to answer your question, yes. Ultimately, we picked out
yeah.
what are the 10 that should be there based on what I would want to know if somebody could tell me the 10 things, and also what I'd want my kids to know if I can only tell them 10 things.
Okay, so let's get into some of these. Some of these I would say, for me, definitely those would be on my list. Everyone would have a somewhat different list, and I'm not going to give you all of mine or any of that. But I thought the first one was kind of interesting. Embrace the power of synchronicity. And I thought that was interesting because that wouldn't be one of mine. It's something that I haven't really tuned into that well, but that's an interesting one. So tell me, excuse me, about the power of synchronicity. Synchronicity is kind of you finding that book on that day on your retreat. That was, that changed your life. I mean, that was one thing, obviously.
Absolutely. And synchronicity, it's funny. In the book, I share that Les Brown, so the legendary speaker, Les
Yeah,
Brown said to me, and so I'll correct this. Les Brown says to the character, but because this is a Hollywoodized version of my life, Les Brown said to me in his living room in Atlanta, when I asked him about synchronicity, he said, synchronicity, in my opinion, is God's way of staying in audience. And I've heard that quote before. That's not a Lesism, I don't think, but hearing it from Les changes it anyway, because it's
yeah,
Les's
yeah.
voice.
Interesting.
But having said that, that's what Les kind of described it as. For me, James Redfield, who wrote the Celestine Prophecy, I've done quite a bit of work with James. We worked on a documentary together. And
Well,
James describes it as meaningful coincidences. And I love that difference
yeah,
because the biggest argument always, Robert, is whether or not this is a coincidence or not. And so my thinking is, let's not argue anymore if it's coincidence. Let's both call it a coincidence. But let's say, does this one have meaning to me or not?
yeah,
So they're both coincidences, but one you can place a meaning on. And so that's what a synchronicity is, the one you can place a meaning on. And so that's how I would define it. But in terms of the real world, what people mostly associate with synchronicity is like, I bought this car and now I see that car on the road all the time. That's
yeah,
a common one we hear. In the world of like James Redfield, who again, Celestine, he talks often about how with a synchronicity, if you see somebody over and over again, you can assume they have a message for you. Now, whether they do or not, that's a way you can, use the synchronicities. You can say, well, I've seen Robert 3 times in the last month and I haven't seen him in 10 years before that. Maybe I need to sit down with Robert and just chat and see if there's something I can It's a message Robert has for me. Or in the book, Treb talks about how he saw his friend's nephew over and over again in a store, asked the kid to sit down. They chatted up each other. The kid said that he was looking for a job. Treb figured out he was in the same industry as Treb has a company. He's looking for somebody to do the same thing that the kid does, and he hires them. And then basically the result of that synchronicity is the kid keeps coming over to Treb's place. He meets Treb's niece. They get together. She gets mugged, and the kid jumps to the rescue, gets stabbed. But basically he lives, and Treb, comes to the idea that because of all that happening, because that kid had the message for him, maybe that's the only reason his niece is still alive. So that's an out there one, but let's be honest, those things happen regularly. And so that's the idea behind it.
Yeah. What happened to me just recently, I'll try to make it really short, but it's making me think of this. The other day, my wife said, "You've got to have the car back because I've got to go to my medical appointment, my acupuncture appointment." I said, "I'll be back." But I was a few minutes late. So she said, "If you're going to be a few minutes late, I'm going to walk there." So I was a few minutes late, and she walked there. And so on the way walking there down the street, she bumped into a couple coming down the road that lived just around the corner from us. We'd lived here 20 years, and she'd never met. She hit it off with them. They invited us out to dinner. We had them over, and they'd become really good friends. And it's like, if I had been on time that day, she would have met them. So that's that kind of interesting thing. So it's like, that interesting.
100%. And I will say too, because you asked about like the power of synchronicity, there's the side of, okay, it's happening to us, but then the other side is, what do we do about it? And what does that even mean? Like it's like people say, "I seen 11/11." Okay, so what do we do? Awesome, high five, we saw 11/11. But I mean, and for me, the 11/11 thing, I just think most I take from that is I'm on the right path. If you see that number and you feel it means something to me, it just means I'm on the right path. But what I started doing is I started noticing these things happening, and they seemed miraculous. And I'm like, there's like 10 of them happening in a week. This can't be normal. So what I did was I started writing them down. So in the book, I talk about writing a synchronicity journal. So I started writing them down because then I was able to see how often they were really happening. I was also able to then by doing that, I brought more into my life, or I noticed them more. And then on top of that, then I could start getting a feel for what am I supposed to do and which ones do I pay attention to. So to your point, one example, it's not in the book. It's not in the book, but I was supposed to interview this guy. He sent me to the wrong address. And then when we found that out, he said, "Well, I'll give you the proper address." He gave it to me. It was going to be an hour and a half away. And so I said, "Will you be there if I head that way?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll wait." And so I got 5 minutes away. I got a ding on my phone. He said, "Sorry, champ, had to bail." So I lost 3 hours of my day. I was in Miami, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to go to Miami Beach and make some, lemonade. But the crappy part is I had flown in town for only 2 interviews, and it was one of the 2. Well, my friend Tiffany messaged me, and she says, "Remember the guy I told you I want you to interview who is from Miami?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, aren't you in Miami now?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, guess what? He moved back. Could you interview him today?" And I said, "You're not going to believe this. I just had an interview that went to heck, basically." And I said, "But is he available?" She said, "Let me check." She messaged him. He goes, "Oh, you're not going to believe this. I had 3 interviews today, or meetings, and they all got canceled." So then I'm like, well, I don't know where we could meet. And she messaged him, and he goes, "How about the Miami Music Factory," which is a big studio, which Jay-Z, Beyonce, Madonna, everybody recorded at. Wow. I said, "Oh my gosh, sounds interesting. I'm in." So we go there. I go there, meet him. We interviewed for 2 hours, hung out and chatted for 2 hours, built a synergy. I've since interviewed him many times, had him on our shows. But anyway, at the end, he goes, "Who else do you want for this project?" And I said, "We just met. I don't want to abuse the relationship." He said, "Well, how about this? If I think of somebody, I'll message you." And I said, "Okay." So I get back to my hotel and I have a buzz on my phone. He goes, "How about Les Brown and Bob Proctor?" I said, "Yeah, that'll work." But the point of that, Robert, is if I didn't lean in and just said, "Nah, I'm going to the beach. This is a crappy day." None of that happens. So that's what I mean about leaning into synchronicity.
Yeah. And it seems that life comes to you as opportunity, 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 as opposed to problem, problem, problem.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's talk about another one. This is an interesting one. I'm not going to do all of them or necessarily in order. But number 3 is make no a new mantra, which is interesting because, yes is obviously very important as well. In a way, synchronicity is about saying yes to things, but no is a new mantra. What do you mean by that?
So when I've done these interviews with so many thought leaders, I'm always searching for what do they do differently? What allows them to stand out? What do they do also? And the other side is what do they have in common? Like, what do these thought leaders all do that we're not doing? And when I say that, I mean like people that want to become those thought leaders. And what I've discovered is one of the things they do really well is they say no to the things that won't move the needle so they can say yes to the few things that do move the needle.
Yeah,
So in other words, they get clear on what is what is aligned with their purpose, what is their mission, and then they figure out what is a no, how to say no without burning a bridge, and then they take action and say no. So it really just comes down
yeah,
to ultimately, I think most of us say yes and then try to figure out how to cram it all in. But what I've noticed is the
yeah.
busiest people who still somehow remain sane figure out a way to say no to almost everything, and then they don't have to squeeze stuff in. They just squeeze in the few yeses that they say.
Yeah. Well, I feel lucky I got to interview you. You had a lot of people. I'm sure you have a lot of demand on your time. So that's great. Um, Here's another one that I think is a big topic. It's a gigantic topic. We could talk about this forever. Mindset is everything. And, our perspective shapes our world. How we think, how we believe, how we feel shapes our reality. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, I agree. And in the book, it's posed, and this is kind of fascinating because when I write, sometimes there's references that other people wouldn't see. And I think that happens with a lot of writers to nods to other things. So there was a nod in the book around this concept, which is I said in the book, the character again said, what is the most powerful word in the English language? Well, in the book, we say it's mindset. And I believe that, by the way. But it's a nod to Dale Carnegie because one thing I took from that book is the most powerful word in the English language to the average person, according to Dale Carnegie, is the sound of their own name. Now, I agree to some extent, but I know as many people get mad when you pronounce their name wrong, there's just as many that say, I couldn't care less what you say. So that's why I think mindset's more important because mindset affects all of us, good or bad. And so I think mindset, if you look at a single word, is the most powerful word to me in the English language. Now, you could make the argument, well, decision is just as important because you have to make certain decisions. Love is just as important. I mean, you could make the argument for certain words, but I think mindset at least is equally it's
Yeah.
important. And so to me, what I've discovered in these interviews is that the thought leaders that have, again, somehow managed to impact so many lives, they've managed to stay successful and so on and so forth. They have a certain mindset. They've truly, for lack of a better way of saying it, conditioned their mindset to be a certain way. So you have a choice. Your mindset could be set on poor me. Always everything happens to me. Or your mindset could be on life is abundant. Everything happens for me. And we can call that cheesy, because people like say, well, a manifestation, abundance, and all this stuff is all, woo woo or whatever. But I think it's hard to argue that somebody that walks around unhappy all the time, miserable, is often the same person that says, why does everything always happen to me? And the
Yeah.
person that walks around happy and excited about life and abundant, people are often like, well, look at him. He's always so excited. What's his deal? But he always seems to land on his feet, he or she. And so I
Yeah.
mean, I got 7,000 plus interviews to pull from. This is a true, if you look at like a Harvard study, the research they do is never on as many as 7,000 people. I've done a 7,000 person
Yeah.
research study around mindset. And I'm telling you that from my experience, mindset is everything. Mindset is the difference maker between success and non-success, happiness and unhappiness, fulfillment and non-fulfillment, in my opinion. But based on a lot of study, mindset is everything.
So let's talk about unconscious mindset versus conscious mindset.
Yeah.
I think people that are negative, fearful, blaming, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, they didn't choose that mindset. They didn't say, okay, I know I'll have a life of being a miserable person. I mean, no. They want to be happy. They'd like to have a positive mindset. I remember I worked a lot on this in the early days of my business. I think I struggled a lot more than you. I was anyway, but I read Dale Carnegie. I read Think and Grow Rich. I read all these kinds of things and tried to infuse this. And I had a mindset about success that really was, I'm not capable and I can't do this and I don't know how. But I had to work really hard to make it a conscious mindset. Now my mindset is things work for me. Things just work for me. Life works. Whatever comes to me is the right thing that comes, good or bad. I can deal with it, whatever it is. So that's a mindset that I've cultivated over time. I've worked on it. I've thought about it. Now that doesn't mean I don't have negative mindsets that pop up. We all get triggered.
Absolutely.
Stuff happens. But I bet you're very resilient about that. Something comes up and you don't, okay, let's not go there. What's the good thing we can see? What's the possibility here? So tell me a little bit about how does one develop a mindset that can bring us a life that has success, happiness, abundance? I mean, you did it by interviewing 7,000 people. That probably helped, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think you get what you surround yourself with. There's a certain argument to that. I actually talk about it in the book, but I did this. I actually did an exercise years ago because I was trying to figure out why I was struggling. And I had heard this great quote that says, the only difference between the you of today and the you of 5 years' time will be the books that you read and the people that you meet. And I knew I was reading the right book. So it was obviously something to do with who I was spending time with. So one thing is I went through this exercise of literally listing everybody and putting a plus beside the ones that are adding good, minus beside the ones that might be bringing toxic energy. And then I literally just said, who can I spend more time with? Who can I remove? And who can I reduce time with? So that's one thing I did. And that changed a lot because it went from me being surrounded by 16 unhappy, negative people and 2 positive to being surrounded by, let's say, 17 positive and 3 negative. And that switches everything. So that's one thing you can do is I call it the relationship inventory. So doing a relationship inventory will help. Another thing is making sure you're reading the right books. I talked about it. Happy Accident. I read this book, How to Win Friends. And then I continued reading those type of books. So I call this feeding my mind. And I often say it's sad to consider that we put so much focus usually on how much and how often we feed our body, but so little on what and how we're feeding our mind. And so there's a book called The Magic of Thinking Big from the 50s. And I think he calls it mind food. So what mind food are you feeding your mind? And so that's another aspect is I'm really conscious about what I let in. Another thing I did, which again, as I'm thinking about stuff, I'm like, did I mention it in the book? But I did, news detox. So a number of years ago, I went on a news detox. Well, in the book, I don't think I go into this detail, but how it started is my mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And the doctor wrote her a prescription pad or a note, and it said, don't watch or read the news. And she's like, what? And she went back to see him, and he said, my experience is the people that have the best chance battling cancer are the ones that don't get immersed in the news on the front of the paper and in the first 10 minutes of the shows. And so her and I went on a news detox together. Started at 21 days, never stopped. All those years later, we still haven't gotten back to it. So I'm just really rhyming these off, but these are just some of the things I did to cultivate a positive mindset. I removed the negative, which is the news side for me at least. And certain news, like I still get news, but I removed the stuff that was the negative and the front of the paper and stuff like that. Like I said, I started reading. I'm very conscious about what I was reading, the right things. I started going to seminars and events. I started saying no more to the things that would bring in negative energy. And you can see there's a pattern. So I just built layer on top of layer of the stuff I'm sharing. And over time, you get almost like a Teflon. Like you can actually, it gets to the point where you can have a bad day and your force field, well, I'll change that. It's not a force field. My positive deposits, which I call posits, my positive deposits are so much bigger now than the negative that I can have a bad day and I'm just really withdrawing from a massive balance of deposits, like positive ones. And that withdrawal, that little negative ones, it'd be like if you had $100,000, you take out 20. It's probably not going to hurt you. Same deal. I built up $100,000 worth of positive. And when I have a bad day, it withdraws $20 of negative.
This is such an important, excuse me, this is such an important message, Corey, because these days we have lots of conflict, social media, everybody's yelling at each other. There's a lot of make wrong. There's a lot of blame. There's a lot of that crap going on these days. And it's not sustainable. It's hurting us. It's hurting our society, our politics, everything. And, years ago, I can't remember where I got it, but I decided I wouldn't gossip anymore. I mean, so I won't listen to gossip. I won't gossip. I just won't go there. What good does that do to me? But you could talk about that about a lot of things. How can you speak good about people? How can you look at what's possible? How can you be expansive? Blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. We really need this message more than ever. This is one of the reasons I did an Ordinary Visionaries, to talk about people that are doing things to make a difference, that would inspire people. Yeah, let's make a difference instead of complaining about why shit doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Always shit is not going to work. There's always going to be stuff. But I don't
100%.
have to be a part of that. I don't have to buy into that and be pulled down by that. So, really, really important. I definitely advocate that. This is such good stuff, Corey. Love speaking to you.
Oh, likewise. The
Really,
feeling's mutual.
really good. So, this is another great one. Practice an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, this one here for me, this one's one that early on in life I struggled with, because it did feel like that, almost like affirmations. So almost like, I used to watch Saturday Night Live, and there was a guy named Stuart Smalley, who was played
Yes,
by Al Franken.
yes,
And he used to look at the camera in the mirror and he'd say, "I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And doggone it, people like me." And I struggled with that because, like, and it was tongue in cheek about affirmations. It was like making fun of affirmations.
yeah,
Now, I mean, this day and age, people accept it. It's normal to do affirmations in front of the mirror and say, "I'm awesome. I can do this." In fact, there's a cool video with this little girl, Jessica, and she's like, "I love my house. I love my whole family.
I
And
saw
everybody's
that
awesome."
just
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, and people love the video. Like, we don't make fun of it anymore. But I struggled because I viewed gratitude the same way, almost like it was cheesy to say I'm grateful for something. I don't know why I didn't see it as powerful and actually admirable to be
Yeah,
grateful. But
yeah,
I struggle. When I say I struggle with it, I mean years and years ago when I started getting into personal development. It was one of the biggest ones I struggled with. Just the idea of writing down, today I'm grateful for this. And so what I started doing is I started instead looking at what my life could be like. I started looking at, if I didn't take this path, what it could be like. And it was easier for me to be grateful by having a frame of reference of, what if this was my life? And all of a sudden I started to realize, wow, like I'm so spoiled. Like, and I don't mean spoiled like entitled. I mean, like, just how did I get this lucky, like, to win the lottery? And when I say that, what I mean, and I think we talk about this part in the book, is like, if you think about it, a person working at a fast food restaurant today earns 50% more than people in different parts of the world. Like, in other words, a person working at, insert name here, McDonald's, is making more than half of the world. Like, that's mind blowing. And what's the difference
sure.
for me, at least? I was literally just born in a country where I was able to have more freedom, more abundance, what have you. So it's just like
Yeah,
a luck of the draw. And so
yeah,
I started saying, how can I not realize that I should be grateful when there's somebody that's struggling for water or struggling to eat or doesn't know where the next meal is going to come from? And that's how I finally started getting used to the idea of gratitude. And then that's what resulted in me eventually saying, well, what are these things that I'm able to do that people somewhere else can't do? And I started writing those down. So it sounds, as crazy as it sounds, it was easier for me to write down the things that I'm grateful for, because I know if I was born somewhere else, it wouldn't have happened, than it was just saying I'm grateful for this. But eventually I started writing down, I'm grateful for this. And I will tell you, this is one of those things that it sounds hokey or cheesy, but just literally expressing gratitude can change everything. Not only does it seem like the world and universe almost does more for you. Oh, you want this stuff? Oh, I'll give you more of this. But it also feels like, at the same time, you change your energy by actually practicing that. I'm so blessed for this to have happened to me. And just to kind of tag on to this, a person we reference in the book is a guy named Ken Honda, who wrote a book called Happy Money. And last night I did an interview with Ken Honda and Janet Atwood. And Janet Atwood wrote The Passion Test. And they're good friends. And so I brought Ken on and I shared with Ken, I started saying arigato to my money when it went out and when it comes in. And basically, what is that? That's saying I'm grateful for money. And
Arigato is
so
thank you in Japanese, right?
it is 100%.
Yeah.
And so the idea is you're thanking money for being in your life. And so this was another moment where I realized the importance of
Mm.
being grateful. But I started saying thank you every time I sent money out. So if I went through a drive-through and paid for something, I would feel the push of energy out towards the drive-through and say, thank you. I'm so grateful I have money to pay for this today. And I never realized how important that was. And that's why I doubled down. I never realized how important that was until I was standing next to somebody who's trying to buy a loaf of bread, and he used 5 different debit cards, and each one wouldn't work for a $3 loaf of bread.
Oh,
And
wow.
finally, the 5th one worked. And some people were like, why didn't you step in and pay? But I saw by the look in his face, if I would have stepped in and paid, it would have felt like a personal insult. So I minded my own business. But I said, wow, like that's that. I mean, I need to be grateful that I can even come in and buy a loaf of bread. And so I started saying arigato, like thank you to money. For being in my life. And I can't, this is how it sounds mind boggling to admit this, but my company's revenue, and which therefore my personal income as well, has doubled every year for the last 3 years since I started saying arigato. It's crazy. So even if it doesn't
Really?
work, I'm sold. Even if there's some other reason, but
Yeah.
that's the thing I did different. And Ken last night, he's added a new thing to me. I'm going to start trying. Is he said that his master told him you say arigato to money, and then you bow and thank it, and then you say thank you for coming, and next time feel free to bring some more of your friends. I never knew that part, so I'm going to start trying that. But it's crazy. Like just to think, a little action like that. And by the way, this is going to sound crazy town, but I actually find it easier now. Not easier. I do it more often. The gratitude whenever money's going out than in. Because I thought that would be the harder one to like be grateful for money leaving. So I practiced that one so much. Now I forget to do it when money's coming in, but I'm always doing it when money's going out.
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Just
I
weird.
love how you've taken these ideas and delved into them, but not just thought of them on the surface. Often we think of on the surface, it's like, okay, let's do an exercise for this. Let's practice it. Let's make it almost like a spiritual practice. It's like of how we think about and consider something. So it's a complete change. It seems to me, excuse my headphone is falling out here. It seems to me that we realize that every moment is a gift. We will be dead and gone sometime. We're alive right now. It's a gift. The possibility is only now for us to be alive and experience whatever. I mean, it sounds like, well, Pollyanna, but it's not. We need to be grateful all the time for everything. There's someone I interviewed before. His name is Salvador Poe, and he has a saying, and the saying is, stop arguing with reality.
Mm-hmm.
Say yes to reality. Reality is what is. And that's in a way that's a attitude of gratitude as well. Just reality is what I'm grateful for, whatever it is. Here
I
we
love
are.
that. I love that.
Yeah. So anyway, I have one more. And I think this is, that's sort of number 10 that I was just saying, staying open to the wonders of life, really. But this number 9 is really interesting, I think. Focus on your 1%. So what is that 1%?
So this is something sometimes I think the backstories help, like meaning where did this come from for me? The backstories help a bit. And so this one was from an elite skating coach, and he was working with Sidney Crosby after Sidney Crosby, the hockey player, had an injury. And he worked with him and 11 other NHL players. And I was talking to him, and I don't know why it popped into my head, Robert, but I said, what can you teach Sidney Crosby? The dude does like 99% of it better than everybody else. And he goes, Corey, you just hit the nail on the head. He said, it's not the 99%. I can't help him with that. But what I can do is that 1%. I can try to figure out and help him with one small little shift in that 1%, which could be the difference of a goal a game for the rest of his career. So he said, Sidney recognizes that he still always needs to improve, and it might only be 1% for him. But if you can find the little things in that 1%, that's like moving a mountain. And so the 1% is, what is the areas that we can continue to improve in, basically, in a nutshell.
So what is it for you?
This is a great question, because I've analyzed this over the years. I've reached out because one of the things I don't say it in the book, I don't think, but I recommend people, if they're bold enough, put it on, say, social media. and say, hey guys, what do you think I do well? What do I struggle with? For me, the 1% is more, well, I mentioned it earlier, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I still think I could improve upon it, is because of being a visionary, I'm scattered. Like, I'm like, let's just make this work. It's almost like Henry Ford said, I want a V8 engine. And they're like, it can't be done. He goes, get to it. Like, he didn't even say, I'll help you figure it. He's like, good luck. And that, but he didn't, and he came back 6 months later. He's like, what was the progress? He said, it can't be done. He's like, keep at it. But what I'm saying is, like, that's still like me, scattered, right? Like, I'm not ADHD, but it's almost like that in the sense that I can come up with an idea. We need to do this. But as far as the operation side of it, like having a system to make it work really smoothly, I end up falling on somebody else to help with that. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I do think having a little bit of it, the system side, is as a strength. So I'm constantly always trying to work on understanding that if you set up something, and like, for example, a great example is with our Blue Talks, we do books. We put up anthology books like I first started with. And one great example is, for the longest time, I would be like, email me your chapter by this date. And then what I would do, excuse me, is I would take the chapters and put them all in a Word document when we're done, send them to the editor. The editor would edit it, then come back. We'd send them to the authors. Then we'd send it to the formatter. They'd format it. We'd send it to the authors and get approval. We still do all that stuff. But the big difference is having somebody in my team say, why don't we just put it on a Google Doc, and they can just upload their chapter. And then you don't have to worry about receiving it. But on top of that, then we don't have to put it together separately. On top of that, when they want to make changes, we don't have to go back and forth 8 times. We just say, here's the doc. We save the original to make sure they don't delete something. And then they literally just make their changes right in the document. So that's a systems thing that I'm not good at. I'm just good at we need to put a book out with multiple authors. I can promote the book. We can sell the book. I can make it a bestseller. But logistically, how do we get there in the most efficient way? So that's my 1%, is just getting a little more dialed into the system side of it, and how to make sure that you're not doing 3 times the amount of work just because it's easy at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I love systems. I like to create systems and make them fast and easy. And, so you're not doing 27 steps, you're doing 3 steps, that kind of thing. That's good. I'll share mine. Mine is always patience. A little more patience. A little, when things go wrong, or when the house is a mess, or when this or that. If I come back to patience, it's not a really big thing to do that, but it's an automatic thing to be impatient or dissatisfied with the way things are. Just be patient. And when I do patient, when I'm, sort of adopting a mindset of patience, then things just seem to flow. So it's not a.
That's another one of mine, by the way.
Yeah.
It's I'll say it's patience, but it's also being detached from the outcome. So being patient with whatever happens, and when it happens in its due time. But I also struggle with being too attached to the outcome as well.
Yeah. So I have a few
working on it, though.
Yes. Well, we're always a work in progress. So, I'm a little interested. You put out books, you've created goals, you brought people together, you've done a lot of big things. And you're young. How old are you?
49.
49. Okay. So I just hit 72 recently. So I still feel fairly young. But I want to talk to you a little bit about goals. And I think goals are, goals are obviously important. This is something I want. This is a vision. I see the vision. This is something I want to bring into being. But on the other hand, when we set a goal, we can become the victim of the goal, at the effect of the goal. The goal becomes so important that we forget everything else. And, who cares if I upset everybody or screw everything up and destroy the world in the process? I just want the damn goal.
Right.
And so I think we have to hold goals in a certain way, where we're clear on the vision, but we're not so obsessed that we ruin our lives. I mean, there's so many people that we know that have been very, very successful, but their inner lives are disaster. They're never happy with themselves. Nothing is ever good enough. They're always beating themselves up. They make everyone else wrong that doesn't do things right, things like that. So how do you hold goals? And success in general, how do you manage that?
So, I mean, for me, when it comes to goals, there's kind of a couple of answers there. Like one is I'll call it the grandiose, in the sense that I kind of, at the start of each year, I write down here's the things I want to achieve. But the grandiose side of it for me, maybe it goes to the vision side or what have you, is I carry it with me. So I'm revisiting it often, maybe too often inside my head. Like I'm kind of like, okay, this is one of the things we're working on this year. So I have this weird ability to multitask inside my head with that. Like I remind myself over and over.
Yeah.
But the other side is I do the vision board thing. I am actually overdue right now. And I was the first one I ever did. I was like, I don't know about this stuff. And I never looked at it the whole year. I kept walking by it, probably unconsciously looking at it. And I remember putting it together. Then I go back and look at the thing a year later. I'm like, 95% of these goals have been achieved. So I'm sold on that as well. But then the other last piece is I used, and I'm getting ready to start again, but I've used this successfully for years. A guy named Darren Hardy, who used to be the publisher of Success Magazine,
Yep.
had this thing. I forget what he called it, your best year ever or something. And it was just it's a whole thing he did, but the one sheet of paper he had, where what he did was he broke down into 7 days. You would put on the sheet, like, my goal is to do yoga 5 times this week. And then so you would literally tick it off each day you did it. And then if you hit a certain number, I would give myself a reward. But what I found is, he does it because his book's called The Compound Effect. The idea, you do a lot of small little things and they add up to a big thing. So the idea was, it's easy to do yoga one day and then check it off. And so that was whenever I was crushing the most amount of goals, that's a system I used that really worked. Like if I said I want to write a book, then I would say, okay, this week I'm going to write 20 pages. And then each of those 7 days, I would put how many pages I wrote. And the way I worked it, as I had to get 85% of my target to get a reward that I would preset for myself. And I don't know, it just seemed like, as humans, we like rewards, we like accomplishment, and it seemed like checking that off was a big, great feeling. So that was one way I did it that was like very systematic almost. And then, like I said, I also, and again, I call it grandiose, but like just in the abstract way, I carry it around with me. Like I'm always thinking, okay, this year we got to do this, and this with Blue Talks, or this is going to be my goal with the book. How can I do that? If I want to do this with the book, I need to reach out to 5 people every day for the next 6 months. Like, so I'm always rethinking it as well.
Well, Corey, you've given us a lot of stuff to chew on. And so, I recommend this book. And I like that it's a distillation of what you've learned up to this point and what's important to you. It's not just random ideas, and you've expressed the depth of it and your passion for all these ideas. I love that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for somebody to doubt that I'm a passionate person and I'm passionate about what we're talking about. It's changed my life, so I want it to change other people's lives. I don't mean just the book. I mean, like all the stuff we've talked about today. This stuff changed my life at the core. I was battling hypochondria and anxiety and everything else for years until this stuff changed my life. So now I want to spread the good word about how purpose and passion can change your life, and these little exercises and hacks and methods that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Corey.
Thank you, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure.